Welcome to the Humor in Games podcast, an analog and video games podcast about how humor is experienced, designed, and analyzed in games.
We are Scott DeYoung,
Mark Lajeunesse,
and Andre Zanescu,
and we'll be your guides in this 6-episode series. Throughout each episode, we'll break down different theories and forms of humor. We'll draw on interviews with designers, critics, and academics as they discuss the different aspects of humor, their own lived experiences, and how their work utilizes humor in games. In this episode, we talk with Dr. Kishonna Gray, an interdisciplinary media scholar whose work takes an intersectional look at technology and games.
For listeners, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, I'd love to. So I am Kishonna Gray. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Illinois at Chicago. I'm in the Department of Communication and Gender and Women's Studies. I research video games, and that's kind of misleading. I often say that, but, I think it's also clear that, I haven't really spent like the significant chunk of my career, examining, textually or visually, video games, right? I'm very selective, in that. So, I focus more so on the people that are behind the games and people in front of the games, really, so I think, my focus is on, how folks interact with the technology, how the technology impacts them, how, folks who are content creators, how their identity impacts the things that they create. So really gaming, I think is more of that roving vehicle in the midst of people's lives of how, folks might engage with it. I'm well, how do you engage with it? How do you engage with other people using this kind of technology? So it might be misleading because usually every time I say, I study video games and people are well, did you play this one obscure game that only I know? There's this posturing of making sure that I've got my, I've done my homework, and I'm no, I've never heard of that game and I will never play that game just because you want me to. I'm not gonna do it. A lot of people always do that to me as well. They're well, I want to know what you think about this game. I'm I'm not going to do this free labor for you. I'm read my books and then you analyze and theorize it according to your own, your own perspective and lenses. So I'm not just gonna, and for the majority of, of my gaming experiences, I play for fun. People are often, wanting me to have these big theoretical ideas around these games. I'm listen, I'm not thinking theoretically when I'm shooting these folks in Call of Duty. I'm not, So, but I think, that's who I am. I'm a lifelong gamer. Grew up with video games. I think I'm the Sega generation. So I was born in '83. I think I had my first the Sega probably around 10 years old maybe. I can't even think about when these things came out. And then I went from Sega to PlayStation 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. I'm updating my PlayStation 4 right now. Got Xboxes and, but very much a console gamer. I am a console gamer. People often say I'm not a real gamer also. It's all these layers and levels, it's just wild, because I don't do PC gaming. I'm my fingers, I never learned that, I didn't learn that skill set, that WASD and, I never, the space bar. I didn't learn that because I didn't grow up with a computer in the house either, so that's just something that just wasn't a thing that I did. So that's my story. Hopefully that's enough. I didn't know what you wanted me to say, but hopefully
that's perfect. I heavily empathize with Sega as the first console for me too. Awesome. And no PCs for a long time. I still can't play PC shooters for the life of me. So
right. It doesn't make sense. It's not natural to me. It's not natural. And I'm not the one that gets into the battles and the wars of who's the master gamer and all that stuff. That's nonsense. However you play, just play however you play.
Absolutely.
Let folks be.
Yeah. I'm not a big fan of any kind of gatekeeping for that stuff. So
yeah.
But yeah, and I guess the subject of today's podcast is going to be a lot about humor and things that you find funny or ways that you think humor works in games. So I guess an easy way to get started is just to ask, what's kind of a game that comes to mind when you think about humorous games or something that happened in the game?
I think it's interesting that you thought that would be the easiest question to jump into it. It's the hardest actually. It's a hard, I was sitting here, I had to even call on my partner to kind of enlist his help of what's a humorous game, So I think I can't start there. Maybe we will eventually get there at some point in this conversation. But I really had to think. I'm like, what do I even find like humorous, right? And then I had to start thinking about like the terms. Okay, how am I measuring like humor, right? So is it something about the game that draws me to like laughter, or is it something that like brings joy? Because I even think joy and humor, maybe like on the same plane and under the same umbrella, but are two totally different things as well, So I really had to think about like whenever I'm playing a game, whenever I'm just like laughing and having like so much fun, what is happening in that game, like for instance. Because I think, and I don't want to conflate like questions either, but if you can just, if we need to stick to the script, that's fine. But
no, not at all.
Okay. So, but as I was thinking it, I really thought about like when I was thinking about like humor in games, I was really thinking about like the disconnect, the cultural disconnect that a lot of populations have like with humor, right? So if we just look specifically between like black and white, there are, meaning black people, white people, black culture, white culture. There are parallel universes, right? That are like different ways of like engaging with comedy and humor. And what one group of folks find funny is not the same as like what other folks like find funny, right? I remember seeing like a thread. So I'm just talking about the realm of genre. I'm gonna bring it back home. I'm gonna bring it back to games in a second, but I think it's really important, that we talk about just how like distinct these worlds are. I was talking to somebody the other day, and we was asking them like, okay, who are your favorite comedians, right? None of those folks were black. And when we asked this person, I'm like, okay, what do you know? Like Chris Rock. They said, oh, I've heard of him. I've never seen his comedy. What about Richard Pryor? Oh, I've heard of him and I've never seen his comedy. Like we were naming like all these black people who we think are like, the folks, the foundational people like in comedy, and they had no idea who they were. Like this person said, I like Dane Cook. I'm like, Dane Cook? What? I like Jerry Seinfeld, and like those are not folks that I ever like, they don't compute in my mind as like, folks who are like, paving the way like in gaming, but then I had to realize, I'm like, okay, these are cultural distinctions here, right? Because we all then have like our different pathways into like comedy and like humor and what we find funny. And so, that's just getting me to like the point that, whenever I'm thinking about, something that's like humorous and funny, it might seem heavy for the rest of the world, but for Black people, because it's like so normal, like it's something that we have to laugh at. I'm really thinking about, there was this amazing book that I read, Laughing Mad by Bambi Haggins. She's an amazing scholar. She does like she does comedy. So let me see, the Laughing Mad, the Black comic persona in post-soul America. So, but her book was really just a way to because a lot of like Black folks, like we take our entertainment outlets seriously, right? These entertainment outlets have been so central to like how we've dealt with like, like collective trauma. They're part of like our collective memory. They're a part of how we heal and deal with situations. I'm thinking about Petey Green, for instance. Like during like the riots of like the was like in the 60s, like the riots like in the 60s, or something that was happening like the 70s. It was like Petey Green, like just a funny guy that basically used humor to calm Black people down and to say, hey, okay, yes, this is happening, but Black folks, we gotta stay calm. We gotta, like, looting, rioting, all that was happening. And it was like this comedian, right? So, and I think that there's no way to like to untangle like just how the cathartic healing nature of like comedy and humor, like for Black people, like that's one of the ways that we communicate. And I think that's also something that's like very important. Whereas like somebody might be like, okay, their comedy is like part of their job, and they're just like, they build up their set and they build up, like all these things, but that might be distinct like from who they are, right? I'm thinking about we were watching Dave, Lil Dicky. He has like a show, right? And he was talking about like his rap persona was totally different from like who he was. Black folks are not able to like untangle like these things from like who they actually are, which is why, whenever we hear like comedians speaking, it's so real and so visceral, and like lets us know like who they actually are and what their values and ideologies are, right? So like Dave Chappelle, like a person who's, he's got some, complex and problematic like ideologies, when it comes to like a lot of things, especially, his homophobia, his transphobia, things like that, but that is like who he is. He could have easily like, just, untangled himself from that and just gave us like humor. But a lot of Black comedians are not able to do that, or they choose like not to do that. Right. And so and so I promise I'm gonna bring it back to games. I just had to like
That's
build,
right.
you know, like this is like what I had to go through whenever I was trying to like engage, you know, with just the first question. And to be honest, I didn't even get to the rest of the questions because I spent so much time on like, you know, the game that I found humorous. I'm so sorry. But I think it's very important. You know, I'm also thinking about like the work of Catherine Knight Steele had a really fantastic article where she talked about like the digital barbershop and looking at how like Black folks, you know, we've taken these traditional communicative like practices, we've taken them from the physical space and like taken them online, you know, so those things like included like the traditional things, you know, included like sacred texts and humor, folklore. And then she's saying, okay, we've remixed those and put those like in a digital format. So what does that look like? So that gets me to back to like gaming, right? So there are a lot of Black folks who like participate in gaming, right? And you know they find, you know, extreme joy in it because, you know, it's one of, you know, it's a big pastime, you know, for like a lot of folks. So then I'm thinking, I'm like, what keeps them there, right? You know, and a lot of the content and like some of the games that we play, like it's so heavy. And so for instance, like I'm gonna give you a name of a game, and it's not gonna be it might get it, it might make sense for you, but the only game that I could think of was GTA. GTA would be the game that I would say I would define as like a humorous game that we can engage in, right? So whether, you know, people think it's like a real, you know, it's you know, close to real life, or it's like satire and it's like a parody of, you know, like, you know, the Black experience in America, you know, that could be the case. But the thing that I think makes it so funny, like for Black people, is that it really took like this look at like just the everydayness of what it means to be like Black, and it like just like sensationalized it, right? So for instance, engagements with the police. Think about how thirsty the police are like when the Black character comes around, right? They're immediately on him. Whereas like when you're playing like, you know, like the white character, you know, they're not as aggressive. Now, some people will be like, oh my gosh, this is so awful. Oh my gosh, we have to like address this. Black people laughed at that. We laughed because it's like, this is true. This is true. Maybe somebody else will like finally see like the things that like we've experienced, like the things that we're talking about, right? And I also think that, you know, so for instance, you know, the Black character, you know, when we engage him, you know, he still lives in the hood. He lives in like in the ghetto, and he lives in like a very like a shanty town, right? Now, granted, any other person who's like looking at this, like would be like, oh my gosh, the poor condition of these Black folks. Oh my gosh, they live like this. Oh my gosh, what do we need to do to help? Black folks are laughing because we're like, that's hilarious. That looks like the bodega right there. That's my granny house right there. Like we're like laughing because, you know, here it is, you know, our actual life that's just being like trying to, you know, people are trying to make like these lives like legible to like these folks, right? And like recognizing that they will never be able to capture the holistic nature, still just like superficial, like surface level, right? So we have to laugh at it because it's kind of like that. I think some comedian, it might have been Kevin Hart, that had that like laugh in my pain. I think that was the name of like one of his shows that I think where he sold out like Madison Square Garden. I'm not sure, but laugh in my pain, like that's like the thing that I could think about whenever I think about humor in games, you know, because as a Black person, as a Black woman, you know, I can't, when I go to the game, I don't turn myself off. I can't do that. You know, and I know there was like a time where like, you know, like the tech utopia world and, you know, like the cyber feminist world, you know, the Sadie Plant, Donna Haraway world, they're like, oh, we can go online and we can be whoever we want. No, we can't. No, we can't. We can't, and we don't want to. We don't want to. Black people do not want to just like take off who they are. We don't want to take off our Blackness. I don't want to take off my womanhood. I don't want to take off those kinds of things because this is who I am. And so I know some people can't go to the game and they can, you know, they can adopt this other persona. They can become, you know, whoever they want to be in this other world. But not all of us can, and not all of us like want to, right? So I'm engaging with the games as a person, like how I engage in the games is like how I engage like in like the real world, you know. So the only thing I can turn off, I can just turn off that analytical lens of where I'm not constantly over analyzing content, but I can't turn off, you know, being like a Black woman when I'm playing the games. Now I'm gonna shut up and I'm gonna let you talk. My bad.
No, this is fine. I mean, I hear myself enough. This is like, I've just been nodding for a while. But this is super interesting because, I mean, because of the way that I think the games industry is structured and the academia is structured, we've had a lot of respondents who've been men or who have been white or some intersection of both. And I don't think we've ever talked about this idea that you have to like, that it's expected that you shut yourself off. Like some of them have talked about like party games, but it's been so like focused on the game as opposed to the people playing him, and the embodied experience of it, which
I'm not even shocked at
yeah.
that. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I suppose that's like evidently a lot of privilege to not have to deal with that, or to not be confronted by that in the media that we consume, or watching Seinfeld like my dad.
Right,
So,
of course. So give me some examples of what people have like considered like humorous games.
Well, I think it varies a lot, and so we talked to some folks from Australia, and they talked a lot about like Untitled Goose Game, or like funny montages on YouTube of people doing like unintentionally funny things in games, or like Goat Simulator. We've had some people who are more local in Montreal talk to us about like Ultimate Chicken Horse, or like Fall Guys. And I think the closest we ever got to like a very embodied experience is when we started interviewing people who are not white, cis, hetero men, who really did start talking to us about like humor that's based on embodied experience, or like the disconnect between being women in online spaces, or kind of wanting to have empathy in the game. And so like some games are much more, I think, about like being wholesome or being supportive. So we got these varied answers, but yours are your own, and they're, I mean,
yeah,
I never thought about GTA in that way, but it makes absolute sense when we talk about it this way.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I want you to ask me, I have an answer for you now. And ask me the first question again.
So I guess the first question, we can go back, or the second question is,
yes.
What is a game that comes to mind when you think about humorous or funny games?
Goat Simulator.
Great.
Goat Simulator. Listen, my kids had me playing Goat Simulator. I was, at first, I didn't know what to make of it, right? So, like, Mom, let's play Goat Simulator. So I'm thinking, we're going to be a goat, like on a farm. We're going to do like some cute stuff and do like that, do that funny sound. I was never like expecting that this game would be it. So if you wanted to think about, well, let me tell you why I also like, think that it's funny, because it's so over the top. It's so unrealistic, and it's just like, it's like you can't take anything serious in there. Like, I'm bumping people. I got my tongue stuck out, 100 feet out, grabbing and licking people. And, like it's crazy, right? But there's no point or purpose to it. So I also find that, I can't play it for that long, because it gets on my nerves. Like, I start to get like frustrated with it, because it's like the most silliest shit I've ever done in my life, right? And then I often feel like, I'm like, why am I doing this? And I could be doing like something else. Like that's like it's those kinds of games that like make me feel like I'm wasting my time, right? And I'm like, why can't I just like engage like with this game like like for hours as I can like any other game? And that might be, that's like part of me, like personally, maybe it could be that me recognizing that there is like real work that needs to be done. And I can't just like turn off everything and just sit here when I realize that, okay, I got to continue to do advocacy. I got to continue to help people do all this other work, but some people do have the luxury of being able just to spend like all their time, like in these silly games. Like, I'm even thinking about like my kids laugh, like in Roblox, there's some games where they're just acting crazy and they're laughing their asses off in Roblox, right? Because it's just like silly stuff happening. So I'm glad that folks like have like that escape, but I didn't come up into games like with that kind of with that kind of narrative, right? And this is also, I don't know if this is like a new genre of games. I was thinking about, just the other day, I was recalling a game that I used to play on Nintendo. Wall Street Kid. Do you all know this game? Google that real quick. Wall Street
I'm gonna
Kid.
Google that.
So Wall Street Kid was basically this game that was
oh my god.
So it was like a parody of like, this person, trying to get into Wall Street and like all the crazy things he had to do. He had to get the job, he had to land the deal, his stocks had to, he had to make money like with his stocks, and then he gets the girl at the end, right? and then like it's a game that I think it's a game that kind of takes itself. It takes itself seriously, but like in a funny way. I don't know. I don't even know if it was meant to be humorous or funny, right? So I really look at this as like a parody of like Wall Street, just that 80s hustle and bustle and grind of like, what folks are like doing like on Wall Street just to try to make it, and then the awfulness like of this culture. So I was a young kid, but just the other day I started spending this time like, going through it and like trying to like understand it and make sense of it. And I was reading some of the captions. So if you see like the playthrough, like the captions are hilarious. But as a kid, I didn't understand like those kinds of like nuances to like understand like satire and sarcasm, but I realize now, so if I were to play this now, it really is just like a game that's making fun of like the people who subject themselves to like the hustle of like Wall Street. Right.
Yeah.
So that would be like another game that I would put on like a humorous list. But at the time I didn't know it was like humorous at all.
Even looking at a couple of seconds of this, I don't understand how someone like an adult could not realize that this is
right
inherently ridiculous.
Right.
It's like the 80s Wall Street guy from Futurama from like gets unfrozen and just talks about sleazing his way to the top, and
that's it.
It's yeah.
That's it. Oh my gosh, I'm looking at it as well. So I'm looking at
my god.
Look at that. Look at the Hot Stocks bulletin. So even they had a Hot Stocks American Depressed. Like, so even I didn't know like the context like of those kinds of things, realizing it was like really poking fun at like just the greed of like, just like capitalism. It's fantastic. Oh yes, good. I see
yeah, Mark is probably having a time.
I love it.
It's so good. And I mean, I think we're probably going to be moving through the questions super freeform, so really don't feel
sure.
Don't feel bad that we didn't like stick to the structure. It's really interesting because we kind of had to really get people to think about how humor might be political. Like we had to ask it, and it's part of the questions, I think. We're like, do you think that humor is political? And it's so clear in the way that you talk about it. Yeah, absolutely it is. And it's cultural and
absolutely.
Like yeah.
Absolutely. Because even think about, so you also, that's one of those things where you have to have people like define the terms, right? So when you hear people say like, oh, I'm not going to engage in politics, what they're really saying is that they're not going to engage in like any kind of conversation around like race or any kind of conversation around like gender. That's really the extent of what people, like may like define as like political. Or, people might also think that you mean like, politics, or we're not talking about the president or, like the government structure. So it's not political. Like people really think that. People don't realize there's a message in everything. And I think that that's one of the important lessons that I always want to like impart, like for my students. I'm like, there are even like, I had them do like even like the simple activity of thinking about what's the ideology that's like present in all these things. Like I made them do like a Mario. These students like swore to me that Mario, there's not any kind of like political intent or ideological like leaning at all. And I'm like, oh, okay. Let me change your mind. And like immediately, I was able to start to like detangle all that, immediately. I'm like, just the core of your mission in Mario is a gendered mission. It's gendered ideologies of a man saving a woman. That's like the core of it. I'm thinking about like the princess. The princess has to be saved. This princess has the damsel in distress, and then people get mad because they're like, oh, don't bring all those things like into these games. I'm like, it's there already. Nobody's bringing anything in here. You just got to open your eyes and like looking to see, what's present like in these games, already. Even with Sonic and Robotnik, I could tell easily as a kid that Robotnik was like a conversation around like a military industrial complex. This is like saying something that, when we couple, this violent tendency with like technology, we have some really bad outcomes like on our hands, right? And like nobody like really saw that. That's why I really love like, the movie, even though I hate like when video games turn to movies. I watched Sonic. Yet. You haven't seen it? Okay, I don't want to spoil it.
I want to see it. I was like not sure that it was fun, but
I want you to watch. Are you a fan of Jim Carrey? Oh my gosh. Okay, don't watch it then. Oh my god.
I was a kid. I was when I was a kid. I haven't like watched. I don't know. Since like The Grinch, I haven't really watched that much with him.
Okay.
But,
Okay,
yeah.
I forget. Okay, I forget. Because how old are you? Go ahead. Speaking of what?
Well, I'm 31, so I was born in '88. But like Jim Carrey was, it was like Jim Carrey and Seinfeld for my folks.
Okay, because I'm guessing you didn't grow up with In Living Color. Did you ever watch In Living Color?
I don't think I did. No.
Do you know what In Living Color is?
No.
Go Google it. Go Google it.
I'm feeling bad right now.
Don't feel bad. It's okay. That's why we're doing this. And if we're talking about humor, you gotta talk about Living Color. Like we have to talk about those kinds of things. Yes, Fire Marshal Bill.
Mark is gonna make fun of me for like a week now because I did not.
It's okay.
Oh, how did I not watch this?
It's okay. It's fantastic. You've got time. You've got time to redeem yourself. We still love you. We love you still.
No, I think for my parents, really it was like
sure
Seinfeld, SNL, Mad TV.
Okay.
It was like a weird mix.
Yeah, and those things are cultural. So the people who like engaged in like Saturday Night Live were a totally different group of people who engaged in like In Living Color, and like the people who watched was it Mad TV, like those are cultural differences. Like black folks weren't watching those shows because of the exclusionary practices of those shows. Like you had to really be like a token in order to be like accepted on like Saturday Night Live or like like Mad TV. Whereas like the people who weren't accepted, hearing their narratives and like hearing their stories, they were able to get like they were able to go to like In Living Color. They were able to go to like Def Comedy Jam. They had to go like these different pathways or Comic View. I mean, even thinking about like that show, they had to go like these different pathways because it just wasn't like a lot of opportunities like for them to be able to like share their craft like to on like a large scale. So just you gotta know some of those things, especially if we're talking about like humor. Like these are really like we can't untangle like conversations around like race like from humor and comedy.
So do you think that a lot of those like exclusionary practices just mapped onto the games industry when it was like taking root?
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Because I'm even thinking about what people find funny in these games. It's really like that. I call it like dude bruh comedy. I really think it was just like this particular brand of like white masculinity that does like just these over the top kind of like the culture of stupid even, you know what I'm saying? Like just think about like the things that are very popular like on YouTube, and think about like these particular influencers that are like popular. They're just doing some of the silliest things. They're engaging on like the silliest pranks, and that's just not stuff that like for the most part black people find funny. And I think what's even more like depressing is whenever I see like these black influencers and these black figures in these spaces adopt those same kind of practices, because those are the things that are going to get them hits and clicks and followers and likes and people to subscribe. Hit that like button, whatever they're doing. Those they really have to. They're catering to a white template of like what's acceptable in those spaces. So that I was going to do me and some students are going to do a project on like black YouTubers and like people who like stream on there, and I really I wish, let me find that real quick. Let me figure
sure
this
take all the time you need.
All right, I came up with like a framework to we were able to like classify black YouTubers like within like a particular not genres, but there are some characteristics to like the black streamers that go popular. Like what are they doing? And one of the things is performativity. Like so they are performing, they're doing these over the top like kind of like performances, but what they're actually even really doing, and what's more sinister, I don't want to say sinister, but like I have to think more deeply about it, is that they're performing a particular type of blackness too. And so in their performance, it's like this like what kind of blackness will be acceptable to these masses. So they engage in like, like stereotypical kind of like language, stereotypical kind of blackness. They're doing like a lot of things that that the template that has been deemed worthy for a white audience. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
No, it makes absolute sense. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think we were thinking about this, and we wanted to ask about how live streaming or like sort of secondhand audiences. Like if streamers are the audience that's playing these games or making this content, then there's like a second audience that's watching them. Presumably, like all the same political issues come up again when you hit that like second level of audience.
Yeah.
Of like who finds what funny and performing for that audience. Yeah, that's
absolutely. I'd love to talk about streaming if that's possible.
Please, yes. I mean, when we started doing the project, we were sort of thinking like, okay, how does streaming change humor in games? Because like,
yes,
like I think it does, but the question is how, based on the genres. And
right.
For humor, that's got to be super strange. I don't know.
Right. So I think what I've seen the most is that these gaming personalities are taking their like the things that they're doing like in these spaces, and they're like transplanting them like into like a streaming space. Right. So I'm really fascinated by, for instance, by like what like Black women are doing, how they're using their streams as like these like digital storytelling kind of like spaces. Right. So there was this one stream in particular, and I thought, and this is going to sound like totally, it's going to sound totally weird and off the wall. So this person, she was streaming, it was the trailer. Like, so it was Assassin's Creed Freedom Cry was coming out. Right. Have you all seen this trailer?
Yep. I think you showed it when you gave the talk last year too.
I did. And, you may have heard like a part of this, so this is some of the stuff that like made it into the book. So during that stream, this person, was like, talking about like all the heartache and all the pain and all the struggle that was like present in this narrative that they gave us. Right. Like, so, this Black woman had, her Black child, stripped from her, she was chained up to this building, he was sold off to slavery. And then, here, that kind of like, created in him this desire to dismantle slavery. Right. And so what this particular streamer did, and she didn't make it like the content of the stream funny. It was her delivery, and it was like what she then did with this content. And that was like, and I think that's what's so powerful with Bambi Haggins' book of this laughing mad. So here we are, we've got all this anger and all this sadness and all these like these collective memories of, what, and, the connections that we have from like our ancestors and our past of like trying to make sense of what it's like to like live during that time. And like here, and she did it with such beauty and such grace. And then she's like, you know what? Like, let's really tell this story. Let's see what's going on. He about to go fuck all these people up. He's got, so she brought in like the cussing and the humor and the funniness, and like made like, and she said, she would be like, I would have beat my son at, like, so she did all these like amazing kinds of things. Right. And so she made and I think what she did was like lessen the blow, like that collective trauma that, Black folks always like experience, whenever they're watching this like heavy content. And then she made it as something as like a funny, entertaining experience, and then she was always one that said, man, y'all ain't listen, y'all sit your ass down, so she would do things like that, it's kind, and I look at that as like the comic relief. I really look at the things that Black women do in some of these spaces. They are the comic relief. They are the ones that can help us make sense of like all this pain and like endure and engage like with all of these things. Right now, there is like that element of like seriousness, like Black women are going to make you have to like engage in this content, but they're also going to do it in a way that's like gentle and that also like helps you, so you don't have to like, bear like the huge brunt of like all that trauma, and that's what I think is like so beautiful about like Black women who are streaming. Whereas like you're going to spend your time like crying, but you're going to spend like a good chunk of your time like laughing as well. And I think that's the point, and that's the purpose, that you have like it's complex, humor and like laughing and joy is like it's so complex, right? And this is why like you see so many because too often like the Black experience is like rooted in like this Afro pessimism, whereas we have to focus on like white supremacy, we have to focus on racism, we have to focus on sexism, we have to focus like on all these heavy themes and elements. And like when we think about like the holistic nature of like the Black experience, like there's so much joy in there as well. And that's the story that doesn't often get like told, right? Because like whenever you like lay something out, it makes me think about, did you ever watch Everybody Hates Chris? Do you know this show?
A couple episodes.
Okay, fantastic. There is a scene. So, Chris is like, the main character that we kind of follow. And like, his friend Caruso is like one of the, not a villain, it's like it's just in traditional, like terms, you would frame him as like the villain. But there's like a particular scene where Caruso, he's like the redhead kid that, just made Chris's life like a living hell, like all through high school, right? But there's this one scene where Caruso was like, damn, Chris, you made it. You went through all this stuff and you still like made it. You came out like on the other side, like nothing I could do could like bring you down, or nothing that I could do could destroy you. And I think that was just like such a powerful moment, whereas, like, I'm guessing like the writers, or we just say, just Chris's character, it was just like, hey, like I have to deal with like so much, you're one individual, you're not going to be the one that like breaks me, because I have to deal with like systems and institutions and, these structures of oppression. Like one individual, these individual slights are not anything. They're not disrupting my day. And yet, Caruso has just basically like devoted his entire life to trying to bring like Chris down. So I thought it was like really, it was done in a very humorous way, but there's so much truth like to that particular scene. And I think that's just like really, really like powerful of how, like people can like say, okay, so you have to deal with police brutality. Okay, now you're getting evicted from your homes, that you don't own anything. You don't even have any capital. You don't have any wealth, but here you are, you're still laughing and enjoying your family. Here you are still taking care of like your communities. Here you are, like that's why like people just can't understand just how like central like humor is to like the Black experience, because it allows us to really like just manage and to like navigate like the pain that the world just like subjects us to. So I'm gonna stop there in case you have some questions.
No, that's fantastic. I mean, I think one of the questions we had originally was about like humor as, like resistance, or I guess a coping mechanism, depending on the context. And I mean, you kind of nailed it on the head before we even got to it.
Yeah.
But I did want to ask you, because I think when Mark and I started our program, one of the first texts Mia had us read was like your ethnographic work with women on Xbox Live, like from Black communities and Latin communities.
Yeah.
And I just want to know, do you find like humor also played a big role in those kinds of spaces, or
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when I think back and I read that early stuff, I don't get sad, but I often think about how much like I left out. Like I left out, which is why like I've spent so much of my work, just kind of like, talking about how, let me unpack it a bit. So, in that the earlier work that I did, I talked about, the intersecting oppressions. I talked about the heaviness of racism and sexism and homophobia, all these transphobia, all these things that, these women were experiencing like in the gaming space, but also like in their physical world. And I never really talked about like, despite all that, they stay in this gaming space. And I never really talked about why, I never really talked about, how they had developed these beautiful communities of support and collective coping, dealing with like, like collective and like individual kind of like trauma, and like how they relied on each other, like in that space. That's like the question that I often get, that people are like, well, if these spaces are so bad, then why don't you just leave? Why don't you just go? I'm like, well, because that's not why we're there. Right. And I think and I'm hoping that's what I was able to do, like with intersectional tech, to say, okay, we've got these technologies, like, what are we doing with them? Like we do like a lot of dope ass things, like with these technology. Black and brown women do a lot of like amazing things, like with these technologies. So, but some of the stories that, like that got left out, like in those early days, so one of the things that I think, I think it might be my contribution to like to your podcast would be that the humor is found in the communities. The humor is not found in the games for so many Black and brown women, right? Because, for the most part, these games are not made for us, right? For the most part, they're playing these games and they never see faces of people that look like them, right? And if they do see themselves, let's say a game like, Grand Theft Auto, when they see themselves as sex workers, right? Which is not bad. A lot of the women like engage with the sex workers. A lot of the women, of course, were intentional about not creating like additional harms to like these sex workers, right? They're like, we're not going to exploit them. We refuse, excuse me, we refuse to like, just use them as, to get our health back up, and like abuse them and harm them and, subject them to like all this violence. So they were intentional about like when Black and brown women were present in the games, that there was always like this ethics of care, like around like making sure that they're taken care of, even though they were just characters, right?
Yeah.
And that's why there's like so much. So, people always, we get, oh, let me tell you this story. Oh my goodness. So while we have, this is part of a blog piece that I'm writing, so there's going to be some more. I'm gonna give you some exclusive content, here. um, I've been part of like the generation that has asked for more diverse games, right? Behind the charge of like Tanya to Pass, supporting, her work with the I Need Diverse Games, and supporting, black girl gamers, and, making sure that there's more inclusivity and more visibility, like for Black women in the games. One of the things that we have to contend with is like, okay, what is happening when Black women are made visible in a game? I was playing Call of Duty, I was playing Warzone, and I unlocked the character Sid. Do you know Sid? The Black woman that's in Call of Duty?
I haven't played Warzone, so please tell me more.
Well, I want you to just to Google her right quick. She's one of the playable characters, right? It's one of the things that, Black and brown women have been asking, for instance, like, can we have more Black women, and not just ambiguous women, right? You can give us like that ambiguous brown woman that, she's like the everybody's woman, right? So Puerto Rican women can connect to her, biracial women can connect to her, South Asian women can connect to her. You have all these populations. And that's fine, right? We're not upset at that. We realize that, we often won't have like our cultures like represented, right? So, shout outs to like Overwatch for instance, for, featuring like all these brown women, right? There's a variety of brown women. So, I always, give props to Overwatch like for that. But whenever I was playing like Call of Duty, I got really excited. I was like, oh my gosh, I get to play a Black woman, like I think for like the first time like ever, like with this Call of Duty. And then oh my gosh, it's really hard to say. I had to also accept the fact that there were going to be extreme levels of violence brought down on her body. There was like a moment where she was, like an RPG like hit her, and then her body was just, and then I had to like look at her for a second, like there was like a cutscene of where she was just like dead in her body, and I was like, and I felt bad. So this is like a weird thing, right? Like I felt bad. I'm like, here what have I actually been asking for? What have we collectively been asking for? Because the nature of like these games is like so violent. And so we're really asking for more bodies, more of our bodies, because Black women experience like, disproportionate amounts of like violence anyway. And then here we are wanting them to be inside this gaming space and subjecting them to like even more violence. I don't play Sid anymore. I refuse to play Sid anymore. I play the white dudes in the game. I'm like, and here I am, like this is like a total 360, right? I'm like here and like it's and I have no humor lens on this. Like, there's nothing funny about this. And I'm laughing, but it really made me reach like a point where I was just like sad for gaming. I'm like, we really have like, because of like all like the violence, I think that violence was like just made real when I saw it being done to this Black woman in this game. And I didn't want to do that anymore. I didn't want to be a part of it. Now that's not saying like I don't devalue like white men's lives. I'm like, I'd rather just see the white guys get shot, but that's something that like we're used to, right? We're used to that, because they have always been present in like all these games, especially like in these military shooters. This is like the body that we've been seeing. And even like in the movies that we watch, that's like the thing. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to let white men have this narrative. I'm not going to complain ever again because I don't want any more women of color being like a part of this. So I think, but there was like a moment where we were like laughing. I remember we were in a game and we were all playing as like Black women. And then we were like, at the point we were like, man, fuck this. We ain't doing this no more. We don't want to see her being killed. We didn't want to, I'm so sorry. I'm cursing too. I'm so sorry.
No, it's fine.
I'm so sorry.
Don't worry about it.
So there was really like a point where we were like, we can't do this. But that also illustrated like the point of why diversity is so necessary. We're like, why can't we have some amazing fantasy adventure where the violence like isn't there, and so I think that was but of course we don't come to the space because of the content. For the most part, most of us don't go because of the content that we see on the screen. We're going into these spaces for one another and to develop and to continue to sustain these communities for each other.
Yeah.
I'm gonna stop there so you can think about what your next question might be.
No, I think that's a wonderful way to look at it. And obviously you laughing about it just goes back to your point of like the humor is outside of the game. It's like it's in how we react to the stuff that's inside. But it also made me think that I think you're absolutely right. Like I can't think of an instance of like a very diverse experience in a game that is intended to be humorous. Like maybe even more than mainstream AAA like action or fantasy titles.
Yeah.
Those are even more lacking in any representation that's meaningful.
Right. I mean, I have wrecked my brain really trying to think of something and trying to think of like different kinds of examples, but it hasn't. I think the humor for humor, you know, when you think about, I think that one of your questions you talked about, you know, what are like the characteristics of like what makes like of what how humor works like in games, and I think most of them had animals were present. Like you're playing, like crazy things are just happening to animals. So like you said, the goose, the Untitled Goose Game, and then Goat Simulator. Oh, there's another like funny game. Do you all know that the screaming shopper scream, or let me look that up. Scream. It's okay. Don't worry about it.
I feel like I'm learning so much right now. So.
Oh, what is that? So it's like a game where you're in a shopping cart and it's like supermarket sweep, but we're just screaming. And I feel like those are human characters.
I found it. Is it Supermarket Shriek?
Let me see. Supermarket Shriek. Yes, look at some of the content. But look, there's a goat. Look, you see the goat? There's a gate. There's an animal in there, and that animal is hilarious. Play some of that. Play some of that. You have to see it. The game is crazy as hell. It's crazy as hell, but it's so funny.
Yeah. But it really does seem like the only kinds of games that are like, I think commonly recognized by a lot of the people we talk to as like funny are these like trying to be as apolitical as possible. Like it's animals. Like sure, like nothing can be an issue, but yeah, I'm sure if I got like a sheet of who made that game.
Yes. We already know. We know who's behind the game, right? We know who's behind the game. You know, I'm thinking about Beatdown and Treachery City. Let me look at that because he's a Black content creator.
Yeah.
Let me look. Let me see. I haven't. His game is like it's like Streets of Rage, and so I don't even look at it as like I wouldn't put it like in the realm of let me see if I can see some of the playthrough of it. I wouldn't even put this like in a realm of humor, but it could be some of that just over the top, you know, poking fun of like 90s, 80s, 90s, you know, like New York, you know, the grimy city, gangs have taken over, and then you just have to like, you know, you have to like save the day. So I wouldn't even put that in like a comedy realm, but it could be. You could read it as like a parody, though. Yeah, you know, you could.
So I did have a question. I think because we've talked so much about, I think like the resistant or like the healing properties of humor, but it seems like that's like met on the other side by like humor that is hurtful. That's present in a lot of games, and maybe we don't have to talk about this if we don't want to. Sure. But I'm just curious if you feel like sort of people using humor as resistance is sort of response to a lot of that hurtful stuff, or like the punching down kind of humor.
Yeah. And I think that's maybe like a normal like defense mechanism, you know, that might be part of like the normal human condition of like, you know, all these things are happening to you and you have to respond like in some way. And, you know, one of the ways to respond, it could be that humor. But we also have to think about, you know, where the pathways to humor comes from, like for Black people, like in particular, you know, humor has like direct lineage to, you know, I'm thinking about like for the United States context, of course, you know, all roads lead to the plantation, you know, that's what I always say, you know. So if you think about even like, I don't know if you've heard of this concept called the dozens. Have you ever heard of the dozens?
No, I haven't.
It's okay if you haven't. It's okay. It's very specific to like, you know, the Black culture and the Black community. Well, the dozens is basically the practice of trashing, trash talk, joning, riding each other, like basically like put downs. Like, so putting somebody down, like based on some aspect of like their physical appearance or what they're wearing or what they have on. Well, you know, reading, you know, of course, because I've, you know, I'm not a historian, but, you know, a lot of my work, you know, we have to look at the historical legacies that, you know, make some of our current realities like possible. Right. So one of the things that I found out was that the dozens was reflected in the practice of like selling slaves. So slaves were often sold by the 12s. And so whenever they were like on the block to be sold, a lot of them would put down each other to increase their chances of being sold. So they would talk about like, oh, like Bubba has a limp, or look at his clothes, or he did, so I learned that there was like this practice of like writing and joning on one another, because they wanted to be sold. And I thought that was like, I didn't know what to do with that. Right. So here we have like these rich legacies and these rich traditions of like humor and comedy. And then they had such a sad, tragic past and a sad, tragic origin story, right? Of like people who just wanted to be owned and wanted to belong and wanted to just have like a place. So, and I thought, when I learned that, that was just like so heartbreaking, but that's not just the only story. There were also like the times, the moments where even like on the plantation, that humor was used as like a way to like escape the realities of the plantation as well. So the cracking and joning then became like a normal part of like, let's just laugh to get like through the day, So I think, uncovering a lot of that really just like illustrated just how central humor and comedy is. So whereas, whenever I just see like the folks creating like this silly shit, I'm just like, I feel like that they are it's disrespectful to like the culture of humor, and it's disrespectful to like what comedy like should and could be. You know what I'm saying? That's why like a game like Goat Simulator, I'm like, that's why I get so mad. I'm like, there's nothing else, there's nothing generative happening for me in this game, and there's nothing generative happening for any of these characters within this game. And I think that's why I don't venture down like that rabbit hole of like funny games, because they're funny only for a particular audience, and they're catering to a particular population, like a population of people in a particular audience. I'm not the audience. People like me is not the audience. It's people who can go and play Goat Simulator and just be able to like just disconnect like from your actual life, because your life is not heavy. Your life is not full of like all this shit. So it's back to what we were talking about earlier. It's like people who come from privilege are able to just sit there and talk about all the humor. People who have nothing going on can just sit and watch an episode of like Seinfeld. I watched an episode of Seinfeld one time. I'm like, what was happening? I watched an episode of Friends one time. Like, nothing's happening. Like, it was some of the most pointless things ever. And I don't want to be like that, because I don't want to diminish them, because I know they have significant, weight within the culture, but I really tried to watch Friends, whenever, people were talking. I think it was when Friends went to Netflix or Hulu or something like that. I really tried to watch it and to see what all the hoopla was about. I did not get it. I tried to watch, Wings and Seinfeld, like that whole genre of like 90s comedy, like all these TV shows. I didn't get it. And I had to just accept the fact, I'm like, you know what? I'm not the audience. And I think that's the same way, that I'm taking like, a lot of humor, like the funny game genre. I'm like, I'm not the audience. This was not made for me. And I have to just accept that.
Wow. I'm like, I mean, I think you're totally right. I'm thinking about my folks, because my family's from Eastern Europe, and they never got into North American stand-up. Like it just made no sense for them. And they showed me Romanian stand-up at one point, and it was a lot of people cracking jokes about like some really heavy like state oppression stuff and what they were going through. And I was like, oh, like this stuff just doesn't speak to anything that matters to you. Like people who are complaining about like being stuck in traffic is not like important to you.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. No, that makes total sense. And especially hearing that, and again, it's all about audience. You like your people are speaking to like a particular audience, and so me hearing, of course, that's what what Romanian stand-ups will be talking about. Like the political issues that are happening, because they can't untangle themselves like from what that reality is. That's powerful. That's heavy stuff. And then you also have to think about like folks who then want to like detach from that. And so that's why, like a lot of folks can't engage in like the Seinfeld, so I totally understand your parents wanting to watch Seinfeld, because I'm thinking about, what they might have been used to was like, it's so heavy. We escape that, we don't want to go back to that. You know what I'm saying? And then so we just want to watch, this dude being obnoxious on the screen for 30 minutes, I totally get it. I totally get that. And I totally get it. And I have sympathy for that. I can understand that. Absolutely.
I don't think I ever had like the language to to like properly break it down, but the way you talked about it actually like, makes sense for me finally. So
absolutely. And that's why, I don't talk about like people's preferences, and that's why, like I understand, so often, a lot of our like, like other white men that are in this space that, just don't get it. I'm like, it's okay. It's not for, it will be great if you got it, but it's really not for you to get, there's nothing to get, and I think that's, and I think that's why it's so hard to like do some of this like this anti-racist work and to try to like mobilize people as allies and try to get folks as like comrades, because this is like some of this is just like embedded into the core of like of whiteness. Some of this is just embedded into the core of like white masculinity, that there's no way to like fathom the experiences of people that you have been complicit in like oppressing. Like there's no way. Like we would really have to have like a complete do-over. Like I don't know how we're gonna train away these kinds of biases and train away, people's like this cognitive dissonance that people have had to not understand, what the Black experience might be or what women might be going through in like the gaming industry. And so I think that it's one of those. Sorry, my kids are being loud.
It's all right.
Children, keep it down. So, and I think it's okay. And some of us, I'm okay with somebody that wanted me to like be a part of like, anti-racism like training for somebody, and I'm like, you know what, there's no way that we could train away this kind of thinking that has just been at the core of like who we are, the core of our nation, of our nations, and like embedded in like the core of who we are like in these Western cultures. So yeah. I'm sorry, this is supposed to be funny and we're supposed to be laughing.
No, I mean, honestly,
sorry, Andre.
No, this has been amazing, and this doesn't have to be funny. I mean, we're talking about how funny things work, and I think like one of the things that kept coming up in other interviews, and maybe this will be like, I don't want to keep you more than we signed you on for, was a lot of people talking about like the word like it's just a joke, right? Or it's just a game. And this idea of like being able to separate all this stuff from like their daily lived experience, it just kept coming up. And now I'm like, yeah, maybe that's 100% like rooted in cultural and like political factors that like you get to do that, or I get to do that, but not everyone does.
Yeah,
right?
it makes me think about a conversation. Well, not a conversation I had, but it was an article that I read. Whereas there was somebody talking about what was the game? Dead Island. Hold on, let me get the game first. Dead Island. Maybe that's it.
It's like a zombie game on a.
Yes, Dead Island. There was I wrote about this. There was a character, a Black woman. I think her name is Perna. I want to make sure to say her name right. I believe her name is Perna Jackson. Yes, Perna Jackson. So Perna Jackson, she's kind of like an ambiguous brown woman, right? So, we all can connect to her. She's like she could check on multiple boxes, right? She could be biracial. She could be a light-skinned Black woman. She could be a Puerto Rican woman. She could be a Dominican. Like she could be South Asian. She kind of even looks like Kamala Harris. She could look like anybody, right?
Yeah.
There was some code that was built around one of her special abilities, and that code was called feminist whore. Now, this is like the ability that she gets, and that she is I don't know. I think she has like a moment where she can just, she's able to like deflect like attacks, and her health doesn't go down. But it was basically like her, like a special move in the game. And the people who created this game, called this feminist whore, right? Now, the company, Techland, I think this is the company that was behind like, that part of the game. They basically said, no offense is intended, right? We didn't mean to be offensive. We think that the person who was like developing the code, just thought this was funny because, here it is, like this woman, has the skill set where she can't be killed and nothing can hurt her. No man can hurt her, right? And then of course, we have to like root this under this narrative of like, oh, well, she's a feminist whore, right? Because she's not vulnerable. She's not penetrable, right? And I just think back through, I'm like, of course, me, I'm not, I won't just allow that excuse to just go like, oh, it's just the game, we shouldn't take it that seriously. I had to like immediately think about, how does this person then view like women in his life, right? How does he actually view and see like feminists like in the world? How does he actually, what does he actually think about like with the Me Too movement? What does he actually think about like all these things that are like happening like in the world, right? And to me, what I took from that was like, here's this person that of course was probably a gamer gator, he probably right, he probably loves gamer games.
Oh god.
It's like probably just like this person who, how dare this woman be stronger than me? How dare this woman, be in this space and think that she, is equal to me? You know what I'm saying? Like just like that kind of thinking, like, to have to put that term with a skill set in a game, right? Whereas we wouldn't have thought twice if Perna Jackson was Paul Jackson, right? We wouldn't have thought twice about, like, of course he's this strong. Of course he's impervious to like harm and pain. Of course, he won't be subject to anything. Of course, he's got this skill set. But with Perna, with this Black woman, he created the person who developed this code and called that particular narrative like feminist whore. He created this additional narrative, of like, the only way to like reach this, is if this woman has purged herself of like all men and you reach the status of like, you're not vulnerable, we don't have control over you anymore.
Yeah.
So I think, and that's like, whenever I take that into like the classroom, I make students have to like unpack that. Just what's the thinking, behind something, whereas people just want us to see this as just a video game. But I'm like, no, these things are embedded into the actual core. And with the example of Dead Island and Perna, it was literally embedded into like the core of the game. So we have to talk about it. We can't ignore it. Did that answer your question? I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's like a pretty good indictment of anyone who's like, this stuff isn't serious because it's part of a game. Well, no, it is, because it hurts people and it perpetuates stereotypes and.
Absolutely. And I could care less about what somebody's intentions are. I hate, people are always like, well, they're not racist. I know the people who made this game, Kishonna, they're not racist. I don't care what their intentions are. I care about the impact. I care about the impact and like what actually happened when this game was deployed and how people actually like engage with that game. I'm not, and that also like lets me like engage in these conversations. I'm not trying to take away anybody's like right to create the content that they want in the game. I'm like, you do what you want, and I'm gonna do what I want on this side of it too. Just know that I'm gonna talk shit about your game on this side. That's what I'm gonna do.
Yeah, totally deserved too. So
absolutely. Other questions? Anything else?
I mean, I think we, in one way or another, we covered pretty much everything that like we put into the sort of the questions that we prepped.
Okay. Will you have enough content? Will this give you enough content?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Oh, I just wanted to make sure that I wanted to make something because I know I came at it from a very non-traditional way. So.
No. I think that's better. Often like these, question formats might be a bit like stunted because like I'm asking stuff and I'm like, yeah, have you thought about this? But this was fantastic.
Okay.
I do want to give a chance to Mark or Scott if they have anything because they've been muted. Like,
oh yeah, absolutely.
I have actually kind of two questions. If that's okay. Do you have time though? I don't want to.
I do. Okay. Absolutely. Go ahead.
First off, thank you so much. This has been incredible just to hear your thoughts, but also for just the time to talk to you. So thank you for that right away. But I just was wondering, you kind of touched on this already, but I was wondering if you can maybe lay it out a little more clear just for if we put it in the podcast. You've mentioned humor in a lot of other media genres such as television or film or just stand-up comedy. How do you think those genres compare to games as a genre? Like what affordances do games have around humor in this regard compared to something like a TV show or a stand-up comedian?
Absolutely. I appreciate the question. So I look at, so games for me are more of like a microcosm of the larger media infrastructure, right? So there's like a larger like media ecology, right? So, I think that a lot of them, a lot of these games draw their inspirations, from, Hollywood. So if you think about like the games from like the 90s, some of those were like direct reflections even of like, Jean-Claude Van Damme kind of era, like the fighting era, a lot of the martial arts kind of like era, so I think it's important that we don't put games like on an island, like where they're by themselves, right? I think we have to like look at them as like just an extension of like, these hegemonic structures that are still deploying like particular kind of messages, right? So, and while, I did, spend like a lot of time, talking about, I know I did talk a lot about TV and, film and all those kinds of things. But that's because video games have been trying to mimic that reality also. So I've been thinking about like a cinematic trailer, thinking about the experience of like a cinematic trailer, like of what they're trying to do to draw like an audience in. They're not trying to distinguish them. Video games aren't trying to like distinguish themselves from like movies and blockbusters. They're wanting to replicate like this experience is going to be just like a blockbuster hit, right? I mean, like the Far Cry. Think about like the experience of the Far Cry trailers. They're always like these over the top, like blockbuster kinds of like of experiences. So what I wanted to do like with my conversation is just put gaming within a conversation of like these other mediated outlets, right? And that's also like important for me because I spend a lot of my time trying to justify the significance of video games to academics who think that games don't matter or think that, like what's happening in the gaming space is just like child's play or thinks that that's just something like for kids. So it's always important for me to like draw like those connections and draw like the nodes between like film and cinema, to like gaming, right? But I also think that there are some distinct things that are happening like within gaming like as well, right? So, it will be good. I'm not sure if you are going to do this like with the podcast, but just to create like a list of like all like, I don't know if there's like even like a list of like, the funniest video games ever made. Like, I mean, they may exist, but I think, you all could like start to like develop and build that archive and especially talk about like why people think that they are funny and why people think that they're humorous, right? And I also think it's going to be important to like contend with like, there's like a particular narrative attached to, what folks like find humorous like and funny as well, so we can't like untangle those realities either. So I'm even thinking about the games like the Supermarket Shriek or like Goat Simulator. I would put them like in a category with like for instance like National Lampoons and like all of like those kinds of like they would be in that genre. So if I were to continue to like make those like connections, I would say, because think about like when we're watching National Lampoons, it's just like all this over the top stuff happening, right? And you have like a white dude bruh doing white dude bruh things, and then he ends up like unscathed at the end of this. And thinking about he's just like wreaked havoc on like people's lives, right? I mean that's the template, and that's the kind of thing. So think about the damn goat and Goat Simulator. He's wreaking havoc on these cities and these towns and in these people's lives. So I think that there's like, something, I just want to make like those connections because I want people to take like gaming. The goal was Chevy Chase all along. I'm dying. We gotta make sure the goat was Chevy Chase all along. Absolutely. But I think, I'm just trying to like make those I'm just trying to make those kinds of connections, and that's why I invoked, the other forms of media, just to show that, just to show the connections between all of them, and also so academics to take games more seriously too.
That's great. Fantastic. Thank you.
Yes.
And then, sorry, I'm just laughing at the Chevy Chase comment.
Me too.
The second question I have is, you kind of mentioned how important humor is for like the collective experience, the community experience. And so I know that like the audience includes like the single player experience, but a lot of what you've talked about is like how important humor is from a community perspective or like the group of players playing a game. So is there kind of a difference in how you see like a single player game experience versus like a collective experience and how you've been discussing humor?
I haven't really thought that much about that, right? About from the single player experience to the multiplayer like experience, because I'm even thinking about, like the populations of people, like the communities that I follow. Even a single the single mode, like the single player game is made collective and it's made communal by their own practices, right? So I'm just thinking about like for instance like Ghost Sashimi. I hope I didn't pronounce it. I always feel like I'm gonna mispronounce that. With that beautiful game, that beautiful, awesome, single player kind of game. I'm thinking about, these group of people who get into like these party chats and they all play together, right? They're figuring out, how to get like to like the other side of the map. They're trying to figure out where all these symbols mean. They're trying to figure out like what the larger meaning behind the game, when the game, gives you stuff. So I'm just thinking about like, even though, the people who made that game, it was very much created to be like a single player like experience. Like so many people still make it like communal because they want to be together. Like they don't want to be isolated, from one another. Right. And I know Ghost that's not a comedy, but I'm just using that as an example to show that like for the most part, the people who have, and it all goes back to like culture. So the people who have like, that communal engagement as a core of their cultures, which is heavily, what African American folks do, what Mexican American folks do, Puerto Rican, like Black and brown folks, have heavily their communities are they're communal, like at the core of them, and they are translating a lot of that into like the gaming space. Now, I'm not saying that's the universal experience. So all Black folks aren't trying to make community. I'm not saying that either. But I'm just saying that even when the games, try to force us into like this singular kind of like individual kind of like narrative, like a lot of folks still come together and they're still like collective, like around these games, of helping each other, coming up like with different like strategies. I'm even thinking about like the strategy guide era, like for instance, Hitman. Oh my gosh. I remember early in the days of like dissertation, like work, the strategy guide was going to be like a part of it, but people just kind of gave because YouTube, people don't need strategy guides anymore, but the strategy guides were so important. So you would have one person that would like buy the strategy guide. There was this group of gamers where they would mail the strategy guides to like one another, so they all could like take part and they all could like have their own like experience, like with Hitman, right? Because the one way somebody played would be like a totally different way that somebody else played. So that's just like another like example of like just the communal nature of how like a lot of these folks that I've experienced have, like they see themselves like within gaming. They don't see them as like individual users of these gaming technologies. They see themselves as like a part of a community and like part of like more of like a collective, more of a collective, engaging in a lot of this stuff. I hope that answered.
Yeah, no, that does.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's fantastic. I've been thinking a lot about like cultural literacies around in connecting it to digital literacies, looking at games as kind of a through line there. And so just for me, my own work, that's a really interesting thing to think about. So thank you.
Absolutely.
I'm good with my extra questions. But once again, thank you for your time, but I'll let Andre kind of finish off.
Okay, awesome.
Oh, I'm back.
Yay!
I didn't leave, but no, this has been amazing.
Okay.
Top interview I've ever done anyways, so
yay, that makes me so happy.
I wonder, before we break, I just wanted to ask maybe if there was a question you would have wanted us to ask you that we didn't, or something that you'd like to ask us or to bring up now, because I always feel like we miss stuff.
Oh goodness. Well, usually, because it doesn't matter what your questions are. I'm going to talk how I want to talk. I'm going to bring up the things I want to do. And I did that. And thank you for giving me the space to be able to do that. So I don't have anything. There's nothing additional that I would have wanted. I put it all out there. I promise.
That was our interview with Dr. Kishonna Gray. Thanks again to the Tag Lab for supporting this series, and thanks to you for listening.